Hello, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to the Ancient Foundation Bible Fellowship. My name is Shannon, and along with my wife Lyndall, we are part of the Ancient Foundation Bible Fellowship, who meet in Port Macquarie, New South Wales, Australia. So as our name says, we are a fellowship who have decided to go back to the foundations of our faith and build our house on that rock, on those foundations, which are Yeshua the Messiah. So if you haven't been with us before in these shows, we discuss a wide variety of topics with a focus on the Hebrew language and culture, as these, in my opinion, are the context our Bibles were written in. So I hope you are all doing well. I'm just going to set up my screen. Just bear with me for a moment while I do that, so you can follow along. Rightio, we should be all ready to go. Yeah, so I hope you're all doing well, and the week's been good to you since the last time we spoke, and last time you may have tuned in. I hope things are going really well for you, that you've enjoyed your feast of Passover and unleavened bread and had wonderful times with other believers. Good news is that our God is still on the throne. He's still the king, and he's still in complete control. So today we're going to be talking about a subject that I haven't really seen a lot about, and it's the breaking of bread, or the table. There's sort of two ideas that are directly connected to each other: the breaking of bread or the table. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. If you're watching on whatever platform you're viewing this on, don't be afraid to say hello in the chat box and tell us where you're from. I'd love to see that. So we're talking about the breaking of bread or the table. Now, the breaking of bread or the table is a very powerful and important concept in our Bibles. The appointed times, which most of us have just gone through, or the feast of Yahweh, are about gathering together, eating and celebrating with each other these times, celebrating what Yahweh has done in our hearts and in our lives and in our fellowships and our communities, and also about giving worship and glory to Yahweh for who he is and what he has done. So the table in Hebrew culture, in ancient times, the table represented prosperity, nourishment, hospitality, enjoyment, peace, and fullness. This is what the table represented in ancient times. As we know and understand, ancient culture is very different from our own. They grew everything. So to have bread, to have food on your table meant that you were being blessed and prosperous. Unlike today, where we just go down to the local shopping mall or supermarket, whatever you call that, where you're from, and load up our groceries every week. They didn't have they didn't have that convenience. They didn't rely on other people so much to grow their food. They were living on on their own. Like they were growing their own food, they were producing their own food, or they worked in jobs to be able to buy food at the markets. But it was very different to today. For in that region or in that culture, if the crops failed, there was a problem. We're not unlike today. We import and we export, and food's quite readily available for now. That's another subject. So the breaking of bread represents this prosperity and nourishment and blessing and peace and joy. All are ideas that are represented in the table. The breaking of bread or eating a meal represents friendship, peace. Covenants are all made by breaking bread. Celebrations and milestones like marriages, births, and anniversaries, etc., are all done with the breaking of bread involved, especially in ancient times. So if you look to your screens with me, the Hebrew word for table is shulchan, and it means table, or it can mean a mat or leather to put on the ground for meals. And the root of shulchan is a shin, a lamed, and a het. And this means to send or shoot forth. One that sends forth their hand to receive food from the table. You can see the action being involved here. You reach out your hand, you send forth your hand to receive the food from the table, or the drink, or whatever it is you're doing. Now, the Greek word for table is trapeza. Trapeza. And it also means a table or stand, like, for example, the money changers. We all know the story about the money changers in the temple. Well, they had stands with their money on it where they changed their money. This was a trapeza in the Greek terminology, or a shulchan in the Hebrew. Another Greek word I want to look at is anakai. Anakai. And this means the action of reclining at a table, eating together and dining. But it's the reclining, it's the sitting down at the table, eating together and dining. So one of the interesting things I want to bring out is that, especially in the ancient culture in the days of Yeshua, only the wealthy had some sort of table or bench to sit at. Unlike today, some of us have a few tables. Some of us even have sorry, I'll repeat that. Some of us have a formal dining room in our homes where we sit down and have special meals out. And then we have our normal dining room where we have our everyday meals out. So we all have tables in one way, form, or another. But in the ancient culture, only the wealthy really had a table or a bench where that they sat at. The vast majority of the population sat or reclined on the ground. When we read in the New Testament, think reclining. When they were sitting at the table, they were more likely reclining at the table. So here's a picture of the Last Supper. Now, the reason why I'm bringing this picture up, we've all probably seen this painting, this picture. Now, this picture just shows a complete misunderstanding of language and culture, as a lot of art in the medieval ages does. A lot of art in medieval times, where we get a lot of our mainstream doctrines from, just show a complete misunderstanding of the language and culture of our Bibles. Yet these paintings and these art and these sculptures have massive influence on our modern day view of the biblical era. They weren't sitting like this, they were reclining, they were on the ground. So this just shows a lack of complete misunderstanding of what they were actually doing. The Holman's Illustrated Bible Dictionary explains that the earliest tables were simply skins spread on the ground, animal skins spread on the ground. This could be where we get our modern day expressions, the spread of a table or a fine spread. In Australia, if we go to a fancy meal or a special occasion and you've got all the special, the silver and the special knives and forks that only come out of those certain times of years and certain plates and all the things that go with it, we would say, oh, gee, they put on a fine spread. So maybe this is where they get the idea of the spreading out of these animal skins on the ground. So here again, this may be what it was something like. It was like this cowhide, this animal skin. They would often spread these out on the ground and recline on the ground, and this was their table. This is what they ate on. Think of this when we read the following psalm. This is the famous Psalm 23. David's talking to the Lord, and he says, "You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil and my cup runs over." So he's talking about spreading out a table to set it out, lay it out. And we can see this with the following Hebrew word. The Hebrew word prepares in this particular verse is arak. And it means to prepare, set, put, or lay in order, set in array. And we could even say to spread out a table like that animal skin. See, a lot of these things get lost in our culture because we always think of, not always, but most of the time we think of things from our modern day perspective. But an animal skin on the ground was seen as a table. The idea to eat with someone and share a meal expresses the idea of friendship, peace, or shalom. It also expresses the idea of acceptance and community, especially in Bible times. Community, this is a massive aspect. And I think we lose this a bit in our modern day times. We see this among the first century believers. Being hospitable was held highly in the Middle Eastern culture, and it still is today. Quick story, when we were in Israel back in 2015, we were in the area of Bethlehem, and it was mainly an Arab populated area. And some people that were on the same tour we were on were telling us a story where they were walking up and down some of the streets, and these families would invite them in and for fellowship, would invite them in for to have a cup of coffee or a tea, because they're hospitable by nature. Now, these were westernized people and total strangers, and they were invited in. So this is still playing out today in those cultures. So we see this hospitality when Abraham ran and met the three strangers. And what did he do? He prepared a meal. He ate with them. He was hospitable to them. He prepared a table. He was expressing this fellowship, this peace with these people that he didn't even know. Generally speaking, I'll say that again, generally speaking, we don't see this trait so much in the Western world. We are quite different culturally. We tend to lock ourselves in behind closed doors. Even families today don't eat much together anymore. Kids eat in their rooms. People Family members eat at different times. Parents are working different times. Some have shift work. So they're actually working when the rest of the family members are having their meals. People get takeaway. The whole dynamic of the table or breaking bread is different in our culture than what it was in the ancient times and in the Middle East when our Bibles tell us these things. Now, I had a conversation with an Indian Israeli from the country of India, an Indian Israeli a few years ago. And he and his family were not really observant people. They were just secular Jews. However, they kept the feast of Yahweh. But for them, it was more the idea of a public holiday than an appointed time to Yahweh. And his children were older, and he shared with me that the weekly Sabbath was great because for him, in his current situation, it kept him connected with his family. As part of the Sabbath, which again revolves around the breaking of bread and sitting around the table having the Sabbath meal, has kept his family connected and joined and communicating. I think that's just such a beautiful picture of how important the table and the breaking of bread is. And I believe we've lost this in our society to a large degree. So he was sharing with me that how the Sabbath was so special to him because it kept his family connected, because they came home and had a meal. They were breaking bread. Now, there are different types of tables in the Bible. For example, the ritual table, like the table of showbread or the bread of presence, which was in the holy place opposite the menorah. There was the table of the king. There was the table of Passover and other feasts, and the family table. And finally, we also have tables of wickedness and demons. So not so much focusing on, here we go. We see just going back a bit, we see this as a wonderful picture of the table. We see that they're sitting on the ground, reclining, and the whole family's there. And it's this time of connecting, the time of bringing the family together. It was an integral part of the ancient family makeup, was eating together and communing together. And we see this as a pretty good illustration of that. Now we have the ritual table. So we're not so much focusing on this table today, but I'm just simply highlighting that this is a table. The table in the holy place also symbolized a source of prosperity and the aspect of life that creates prosperity. And all this prosperity ultimately comes from Yahweh. So what do I mean by that? Well, to have land and to have a crop symbolize that you are free, that you are a free man. If you're a slave, you don't have land and you don't have crops. So the harvest represents prosperity and blessing. The bread represents all these things combined. So when you look at the bread on the table of presence, it represents the blessing in the hand of God. Because A, they had a crop, they were free, and B, they had to rely on the rains and the favorable weather conditions so they can have a crop and to reap that crop. And to reap a crop meant that you were blessed, meant that you had food on your table. So to be able to have bread on the table of presence represents Yahweh's provision, represents that he is the source of all their prosperity. He is the source of all their material things, because all these things come from him ultimately. Next, and there's a whole you could spend months on just that. So we're moving on now to the king's table. To eat at the king's table was a big deal and a great honor. The king's table is a very important place, a place of honor, provision, favor, closeness, and also had a social status that went with it. To be one that eats at the king's table means to be looked after by the king. Let's have a look at this. In 1 Samuel 20, 25 to 30, it says, "Now the king sat on his seat, as at other times, on a seat by the wall. And Jonathan arose, and Abner sat by Saul's side, but David's place was empty. Nevertheless, Saul did not say anything that day, for he thought, something has happened to him. He is unclean. Surely he is unclean." Verse 27, "And it happened the next day, the second day of the month, that David's place was empty. And Saul said to Jonathan his son, Why has the son of Jesse not come to eat, either yesterday or today?" So Jonathan answered Saul, "David earnestly asked permission of me to go to Bethlehem." Verse 29, "And he said, Please let me go, for our family has a sacrifice in the city, and my brother has commanded me to be there. And now if I have found favor in your eyes, please let me get away and see my brothers." Therefore he has not come to the king's table. Then Saul's anger was aroused against Jonathan, and he said to him, "You son of a perverse and rebellious woman, do I not know that you have chosen the son of Jesse to your own shame and to the shame of your mother's nakedness?" So here we see Saul got upset and offended when David was not eating at his table. We also see another beautiful picture in the king's table in a positive sight, in a positive light, in the story of Mephibosheth and David. And I encourage you on your own to look that up, and it's in 2 Samuel chapter 9, verses 1 to 11. This is such a beautiful story, and there's so much in it that we can learn from it about this story of Mephibosheth. And this is a place where his life, Mephibosheth's life, was changed in a really positive manner. Mephibosheth was the son of Jonathan. And we know Jonathan was David's best mate, best friend. Mephibosheth was lame in his feet and he couldn't work. He was elevated from one of the lowest social statuses to one of the highest by being and eating at King David's table. The king's table can be a place of change. As we know, when we eat at the table of the King of Kings. So I encourage you to go through that story, because you will see that Mephibosheth went from here to here. And not only that, there were so many things done for him, and he had servants and people working the land. It's such a wonderful story of favor and blessing and prosperity by the hand of the king, King David. There's a lot to be learnt from that account. So, moving on. 1 Kings 2:7. It says, "But show kindness to the sons of Barzillai the Gileadite, and let them be among those who eat at your table. For so they came to me when I fled from Absalom, your brother." So this is David giving instruction to Solomon to show favor to these people and let them eat at your table, at the king's table. These men were being shown favor. Again, Nehemiah 5 verses 17 to 19. "And at my table were 150 Jews and rulers, besides those who came to us from the nations around us. Now that which was prepared daily was 1 ox and 6 choice sheep. Also fowl were prepared for me, and once every 10 days an abundance of all kinds of wine. Yet in spite of this, I did not demand the governor's provisions, because the bondage was heavy on the people. Remember me, my God, for good, according to all that I have done for this people. So again, we see the importance of the table. To eat at the king's table or at someone in high office table implies that he met your living expenses. So we just read this in Nehemiah. He provided 1 ox and 6 choice sheep and every 10 days an abundance of all kinds of wine. So we see the power of the table here and the favor and to be looked after by the king. The table can represent prosperity, which we've already said. 1 Kings 10, 4-5. And it says, and when the queen of Sheba had seen all the wisdom of Solomon, the house that he had built, the food on his table, the seating of his servants, the service of his waiters, and their apparel, his cupbearers, and his entryway by which he went up to the house of Yahweh, there was no more spirit in her. So this means that there was so much abundance. There was so much food and wine, hence the cupbearers, on Solomon's table, that she was just, her breath, her spirit was no more in her. She was just so amazed by the prosperity on Solomon's table. Again, represents food and bread and wine and all the other bits and pieces represent prosperity. The good king's table is a shadow. Now remember what I just said. The good king's table is a shadow of the King of Kings, which is the Passover table, where we are to remember the favor, mercy, grace, provision, shalom, love, redemption, and atonement for all these things he made for us. The table of our King Messiah Yeshua represents all these and more. And at a time in the future, there will also be the table of the wedding supper of the Lamb. The beautiful thing is that anyone is called to these tables, the tables of Messiah Yeshua. Anyone is called to those tables. But it is the choice of each individual whether they want to be partakers of that table or not. If you want to be a partaker of the Passover table, or if you want to be seated at the wedding supper of the Lamb, it's our choice. It's your choice. It's up to you whether you're going to be there or not. Another thing I want to touch on is that there is tables of wickedness. In Hebrew, there's often positive and negative. So if you've got a positive table, more than likely you're going to have a negative table. Nehemiah 5:14-16. Moreover, this was just before the one we just read out a little bit earlier. So we see the contrast here, where Nehemiah provided for all those people. But before that, he says, moreover, from the time that I was appointed to be their governor in the land of Judah, from the 20th year until the 32nd year of King Artaxerxes, 12 years, neither I nor my brothers ate the governor's provisions. But the former governors who were before me laid burdens on the people and took from them bread and wine, besides 40 shekels of silver. Yes, even their servants bore rule over the people. But I did not do so, because of the fear of God. Indeed, I also continued the work on this wall, and we did not buy any land. All my servants were gathered there for the work. I mean, there's so much that's packed in these verses. Nothing new under the sun. Most modern day governments are still operating like this. They're getting their bread, their food, their wine by the labours and by the hands of the people while doing nothing themselves. Their tables are full and rich, but it is directly from placing the burdens on the people or heavily taxing people so they can live the high life. They are tables of wickedness. And it's still going on today. In Australia, we call that having their snouts in the trough. I'll leave you to work that out. 1 Kings 18:19. Now therefore, send and gather all Israel to me on Mount Carmel, the 450 prophets of Baal, and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table. So here we see another table of wickedness. Jezebel's table. You can only imagine what was going on at that table. Psalm 69 verse 22. Let their table become a snare before them, and their well-being a trap. So again, here we see David talking about tables of wickedness. The context of this verse is David's enemies, those that don't follow Yahweh or have forgotten his ways, when one is fat and full and forgets God. One's prosperity or material things can blind you. Another way of saying that, people that forget God and focus on the material things, they say, I have provided and made this wealth for myself. By my hands, by my strength, I have attained what I have. They don't acknowledge Yahweh. They are tables of wickedness. Yahweh actually warns and speaks to Israel about not being like that. Always acknowledging Yahweh, that he's the true source. He's their provider. They have what they have because of him. Another example. Deuteronomy 31:20. When I have brought them to the land, flowing with milk and honey, which I swore to their fathers, and they have eaten and filled themselves and grown fat. Where do they do this? At the table. Then they will turn to other gods and serve them, and they will provoke me and break my covenant. And this is linked to worshipping idols and serving other gods. When they're fat and full, when they're eating at the table, they're worshipping other gods and idols. We see this in the New Testament, in the Brit Kadashah. Another example before we go there, Isaiah 65:11. But you are those who forsake Yahweh, who forget my holy mountain, who prepare a table for Gad. Now, this isn't one of the Hebrew tribes Gad. This is a god Gad, and who furnish a drink offering for many. These are gods of riches and fortunes. So they're preparing a table for other gods. They're worshipping other gods. They're forsaking Yahweh and his temple, holy mountain, and preparing a table for foreign gods. And they're based around fortunes and wealth and prosperity rather than Yahweh giving them, acknowledging Yahweh for their wealth and prosperity. So we see this in the Brit Kadashah, the New Testament. 1 Corinthians 10, verses 20 to 21. Rather, the things which the Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice to demons and not to God. And I do not want you to have fellowship with demons. You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons. You cannot partake of the Lord's table and of the table of demons. So here we see Paul's rebuking them and discipling them and teaching them that you can't be partaking in pagan practices and worshipping other gods and partaking of the Passover meal. Paul's talking about the Passover meal here, the table of the Lord. You cannot be doing Passover and then going and doing other pagan things, which is to drink from the cup of demons. For example, you cannot partake of Yahweh's feast and the Passover table and then observe days like Easter, Christmas, Halloween, New Year's Day, Valentine's Day, and many other days that all have their roots in the practices of the paganism. This is the same as making sacrifices to demons and idols. They are just modern day versions of ancient practices. Ancient Israel did these same things when they were warned over and over and over not to. The altar is likened to the table of Yahweh also, as we know that the Torah teaches that the animals that were offered and sacrificed were to be without blemish and to be of the highest quality. Yet Israel treated the altar with contempt. They were giving the weakest, blemished animals on Yahweh's altar. And we can see this in the following verses. Malachi 1, 7-8. You offered defiled food on my altar. But say, in what way have we defiled you? By saying the table of the Lord is contemptible. So here we see the altar is also a table. And when you offer the blind as a sacrifice, is it not evil? And when you offer the lame and sick, is it not evil? Offer it then to your governor. Would he be pleased with you? Would he accept you favorably? Says Yahweh of hosts. So we see that he's saying, would you give these to those that rule over you? Well, why are you giving them to me? I'm God. I'm Yahweh. I'm the creator. And here we see a little bit later in the same chapter, Malachi 1, 12-13. But you profane it, in that you say the table of the Lord is defiled, the table of Yahweh is defiled, and its fruit, its food is contemptible. You also say, oh, what a weariness, and you sneer at it, says Yahweh of hosts, and you bring the stolen, the lame, and the sick. Thus you bring an offering. Should I accept this from your hand, says Yahweh? I mean, this is powerful stuff. So the altar in the courtyard of the tabernacle of the temple is seen as a table of the Lord. Now, many say that the execution stake was an altar where Yeshua, our Messiah, was sacrificed on. It was a burden for them to offer these things, to do these things. It was a burden for the people that Malachi is speaking out against. People say that today. They say, oh, the feasts are a burden. We don't have to do those anymore. My goodness. But they're happy to have their Easter. They're happy to have their Christmas and their Halloween and have their Valentine's Day and their New Year's Day and all the other days. They're happy to do them. They're happy to offer those things at those tables. And yet these same people who confess God out of their mouth say that these other Yahweh's tables done away with. To these people, I would say, hang on a minute. Are you God? Are you God? Who are you to change the times and the seasons, the feast? Do you set the rules now? My Bible says that Yahweh doesn't change. His days are on his appointed times. Those times don't change. This doctrine is from the table of wickedness. It is part of the drinking of the cup of demons and eating at the table of demons. The Passover meal is also breaking bread. This is turned into what in most churches is called communion, or the Catholic Church, the Eucharist. in which they believe that the wafer, this is what they actually believe in the Catholic Church, that they believe that the wafer and wine turns into the body and blood of Messiah when they are eaten. Literally, that's what they believe. These came out about centuries after the death and resurrection of Yeshua, brought in with the church era with Constantine, who changed many things that were seen as being Jewish. This included changing the day of worship from the biblical seventh day, weekly Sabbath. The Passover day was changed. That was changed to the celebration in the pagan culture named as Easter, Ishtar. The communion and Eucharist were also added. They were being introduced. The Eucharist, which is what the communion comes from, was being introduced to take away from the Passover meal. Because Passover is too Jewish. It's a feast. We don't do those anymore. You see this in that era where everything Jewish, and when I mean that, I'm not saying traditional stuff, I'm talking about the Feast of Yahweh. They were seen as being Jewish. No, they're the Feast of Yahweh. People think they're Jewish because the Jews did them. Remember, one law was given to the native born and to the stranger who joined themselves with. So this Eucharist and then what evolved into the communion has taken away from what the Passover meal represented. This breaking of the unleavened, where in the Bible does it teach to do this week in and week out? It doesn't teach to do it week in and week out. This breaking of the unleavened bread, when I'm talking about the Passover meal, I'm talking about also the unleavened bread. This breaking of the unleavened bread was done once a year, starting with the Passover meal and going for a week until the completion of the week of unleavened bread. This is what the Bible says. The communion has its origin in paganism, as with most Christian traditions today. These all came about with a new religion created by Constantine, who was emperor of Rome, and mixed paganism and biblical things together to bring about a religion of the state that disregarded anything Jewish. So voila, all of a sudden you have communion, which is not found anywhere in the scriptures, whereas Passover and unleavened bread are all through it. Only those who have been circumcised or redeemed people may eat the Passover. This is the only feast where this is commanded. What I really like is that, as mentioned earlier, in the days of Yeshua, only the wealthy had tables and stools or benches. The majority of people sat or reclined on the ground at this meal. The Passover meal was eaten in a reclined position, and it didn't matter if you were rich or not. Everyone reclined at the Passover meal. Everyone was on the same level. There is no us and them. Now to the breaking of bread. This is what we do weekly. In our fellowship, we break bread weekly. But it's not communion. Like I said, that is once a year, which is the Passover. Acts 2. Might have to get through this pretty quick. Here's a picture of the Passover table where they sat down, reclining. Everyone was on the same level. Acts 2, 46 to 47. So continuing daily with one accord in the temple and breaking bread from house to house, they ate their food with gladness and simplicity of heart, praising God and having favor with all the people. And the Lord added to the church or the ecclesia or the assembly daily those who were being saved. See, they were breaking bread, they were having a meal together. And wine was often associated with their meals. They didn't just drink wine once a year. They drank wine regularly and broke bread regularly with each other. But this bread is not unleavened bread. This bread is the normal leavened bread. So there's a difference between the two. Acts 20, verse 7. Now on the first day of the week, when the disciples came together to break bread, Paul, ready to depart the next day, spoke to them and continued his message until midnight. So in these two verses that we've just gone through in Acts, these two passages, they were regularly eating a communal meal. Not communion, a meal, a communion meal. A communal meal. They were eating a meal or maybe even several meals throughout the week with each other. This is what we do every Sabbath. We break bread. And I'm talking what we do in our fellowship. We break bread together and drink wine or grape juice. Bread and wine are normal items at most meals in biblical culture. Now, also what needs to be understood that the word for bread, which is lechem in Hebrew, is not just for bread. It can also mean food in general, where the word for unleavened bread, matzah, is specifically unleavened bread or unleavened things, not just bread, as in general terms of food or leavened bread. There is something so special about doing this together. As discussed earlier, around the table, around the breaking of bread is companionship, friendship, shalom, hospitality, relationship, getting to know each other. This is so important, which I think is lacking in our modern day culture, especially in churches. That a lot of people don't even do this. They just rock up to a meeting and go home. It's important to break bread with each other, as in fellowship. The following happened after the resurrection of Yeshua. This happened after the resurrection. Luke 24, 28 to 31. Then they drew near to the village where they were going, and he indicated that he would have gone further. But they constrained him, saying, "Abide with us, for it is toward evening, and the day is far spent." And he went in to stay with them. Now it came to pass, as he sat at the table, he took the bread, blessed it, and broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they knew him, and he vanished from their sight. So here we see Yeshua going in, having a meal with them. And we know over the meals they said prayers and blessings. And he blessed the bread and broke it and gave it to them. Again, this was not communion. It was a meal. We break bread in two ways on the Sabbath. When we teach and discuss the scriptures, we're breaking bread, spiritual bread. Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of Yahweh. So when we break bread on the Sabbath, we're actually doing it two ways. We're doing it when we discuss and teach the scriptures, and we are breaking that's breaking bread spiritually. And then after all that's done, we in our fellowship we do it in the physical. And we are nourishing ourselves not only in food, but in fellowship with one another. Yeshua is the word. Yahweh's word is bread. Yeshua said this in the following. And I just quoted it just then. But he answered and said, "It is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of Yahweh." And this directly quotes Deuteronomy 8, verse 3. It is in the brokenness of the one named Yeshua, our Messiah, that causes us to gather together so we can break bread together and be part of the one body. It is because of his brokenness we are redeemed and that we are here together. That's why you're listening here right now. That's why I'm here right now. All because of him and his brokenness. The table or breaking of bread can occur anywhere. For example, when Yeshua taught the 5,000. Matthew 14, verse 9. Then he commanded the multitudes to sit down. What happens when you sit down? You're eating. Sit down on the grass. He took the 5 loaves and the 2 fishes and looked up to heaven. He blessed it, said the blessing, and broke and gave the loaves to the disciples, and the disciples gave it to the multitudes. What was happening here? They were having a meal together, a miraculous meal. He blessed it and broke it while they were reclining and sitting in the grass, and they fellowshipped and had a meal together on the side of a hill in the middle of nowhere. So as we see that the breaking of bread, the table has many different forms and ways about it. Finally, there is also a table of meals we can eat with the unrighteous. And we'll finish up on this. Matthew 9, verses 10 to 13. Now it happened as Yeshua sat at the table in the house, that behold, many tax collectors and sinners came and sat down with him and his disciples. And when the Pharisees saw it, they said to his disciples, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? When Yeshua heard that, he said to them, those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. But go and learn what this means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice. For I did not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. We are called to eat with the unrighteous with a purpose. There's a purpose, not with mingling or being involved with them or their lifestyles, but to minister and share the gospel with them. Hopefully, the outcome is that sinners will come to repentance. So that's what we see. We're called to eat with these people, just like he did, but with the purpose and the goal of bringing them into the kingdom. So we have seen that the breaking of bread is a very important part of a believer's life, especially partaking at some of very important tables. We have seen the positive and negative aspect of breaking bread and eating at a table. One can do it the Bible way, or one can break the bread and eat at the tables of wickedness and demons. Either way, you're going to be eating at one table. You're going to be eating at the biblical table and the various tables that are involved with that, or you're going to be eating at the table of the cups and drinking of the wickedness of demons. So there's 2 tables. You're either going to be eating at one or the other one. Everyone eats at one of those tables. I've explained the why and how we break the bread on the Sabbath day and the differences between this and other introduced religious practices and traditions. We also discussed the significance of the Passover meal from the perspective of breaking bread and the holiness of that time. The Kadesh, when we talk about consecration and the holiness of the time, it's in the Hebrew, the form is intensive. So it means it's very important. There's an intense aspect to it. It's not just something done on a whim. It's not something done week in and week out, because the appointed times are annual cycles. Just like the Passover is annual, it's done once a year. It's holy. It's a consecrated time. May we be a people who continue to break bread and seek that union of fellowship with each other, friendship and relationship with him and one another, both in the breaking of the bread by teaching and discussing his word, and by the breaking of bread in the physical sense and becoming one in him. As you can see, that the table and the breaking of bread is a very important thing in the scriptures. We see Yeshua did it a lot, many times, at many different times. We see the Passover table. We see the other feasts. We see the altar as a table. We see righteous kings looking after their people, showing favor. Governors, people in high office that are righteous, looking after those that they govern over. And then we also see the other contrast, wicked kings looking after themselves, snouts in the trough, living the high life on other people's labours and money through taxation. And we see the observance of pagan practices as the tables of wickedness and demons. So I've covered a lot of information today. I encourage you to go over this again. And I pray that this has been a blessing, that you've learned a bit, and ultimately, that hopefully you've drawn that little bit closer to Yahweh, understanding the scriptures that little bit more. I hope that's been evident. I hope that my ultimate goal is to try and bring you that little bit closer to Him. So with that, I hope you've just been blessed. You've been blessed by this teaching. Again, I would like to thank Mark David Smith and his team for the opportunity to be able to share with you. I encourage you to tune into the Messianic Lamb Network throughout the week and listen to all the other wonderful ministries. There's a lot of new shows on and coming, so I encourage you to tune in and listen to them. I hope this teaching has been a blessing and an encouragement to you. I thank you for watching and listening. Until next time, may Yahweh's hand be upon you, and may Yahweh watch over you and protect you and your loved ones. So have a great week, and until next time, be blessed and shalom.
We are richly blessed to bring you what we believe is the fullest, most diverse, yet up-to-date progressive teachings, discussion, and prayer programming you can find anywhere on this planet. Be sure to take the tour of the MessianicLambRadio.com website. I'm Susan Hugie, thanking you for joining us on the Messianic Lamb Video Network.
Thank you.